This is the Red, White and Blue Show with David Polden on Project Natter.
Richard, welcome back.
Great to see you, David. Thanks for having me on again. Always a pleasure.
Pleasure as always. Thanks for your time. Really appreciate it. So I just thought in this one we'll just touch on the US election and what's been going on over there, because it's been loads of allegations of voter fraud, from dead people voting to ballot box burglary. We've seen videos of people emptying out ballot boxes after the day of the election. All sorts of madnesses going on, from glitches in the system even. Where we saw 6,000 votes go for Trump to Biden. That's now been corrected. But the same system is used throughout various states in the US. What have you made of it all?
Well, I have to say, it does look to me like about the most fraudulent election I've ever seen in the West. I think there's lots and lots of evidence of foul play. And I mean, even if you just start with the basics, that Biden does not appear to have been a very popular candidate, and certainly the sort of empty rallies and the lack of enthusiasm for him. It's difficult to know what he stood for. There don't seem to be any policies particularly. He appears to be getting quite senile and often gets confused when talking. So I think that he's been actually not a very popular candidate. And the idea that he's suddenly managed to produce whatever it is, 74 million votes, and be the most popular US presidential candidate in a century or more, I find is very, very far-fetched. So it's worth looking at how that's happened. And for me, obviously I think that there are lots and lots of signs of electoral fraud, but one needs to fixate on, I think, the significant fraud, the fraud that's not just, a few votes here or a few hundred votes over there, but where, as you say, you appear to see thousands of votes, and even in some cases, it seems hundreds of thousands of votes produced, surprisingly, just in time to get Biden over the line in swing states. And some of those examples are, let's just say, eyebrow-raising. The one in Wisconsin, I think, is one of the clearest and most obvious cases of election fraud that I've ever seen. What happened was, I'll try and explain this simply so that it's clear. The postal ballots, of which there are increasing numbers, and they are influential now, are posted in, as I understand it, to one or several central collection offices through the US Postal Service, USPS, and they tend to be fairly random for the state because they come from all over the state. So when boxes of postal ballots are introduced into the count, it's very typical that the ratio of, let's say, Biden to Trump votes in a particular box is actually very close to state average, or at least state average for the postal votes. So if there's a tendency in the postal votes to be more for Biden or more for Trump, okay, that may be the case, but there is an average for the postal votes, and that is more or less across pretty much all postal boxes, because everybody posts in on different days and they all get accumulated in various ways, but the boxes generally are random. And the result of this is that when you plot with time the counting of the boxes of postal votes, what you see along the middle of the graph is more or less a straight line, because there is very little variation in the ratio of Biden to Trump in the postal boxes. So all those blue dots, all those dots along the graph form a straight line. And what's extraordinary is that at about 4 a.m., if you look at these figures for Wisconsin, there's a very, very well clearly established straight line for all the postal votes, and they're all bang on it. I mean, it really is an absolute straight line. And suddenly, at 4 a.m., bump, they suddenly jump significantly over into the Biden direction. And after that, all the postal vote boxes that were dumped in at 4 a.m. are all at that much higher Biden norm. So on that graph, there are effectively two state postal averages, the pre-4 a.m. average and the after 4 a.m. average. And sure enough, the after 4 a.m. average happens to be much more favorable to Biden. and it's the fishiest. I would say probably the clearest evidence of just basic ballot dumping that you could ever see in an election graph. I obviously have had to learn a little bit about elections over the last 5 years. Starting with the referendum and UKIP activities and so on. I've attended several counts. I've attended the referendum count in 2016. I've attended a couple of local election counts. I've attended general election count, having stood myself, and I've also attended a European election count. So I've seen a lot of election counts over the last 5 years, and I've had to look into this. So I am not a psephologist, but I am at least technical enough to be able to look at a graph of a collection of ballot boxes and what their average vote was, and see if there's something weird there. And there is no question that in Wisconsin at 4 a.m. they suddenly dumped in a whole load of new postal ballot boxes that do not conform to the state postal ballot average. They have a significant jump towards Biden, and that I think is a very, very clear signal that those boxes were tampered with. Those boxes were maybe kept in waiting, pre-printed, and they may have printed them at a rate that they thought they could get away with based on the polling, which they had some, plenty of advance warning of. And so they dumped those boxes into the system. And it's clear as day when you look at that graph, this is a fraudulent vote. There is no question that, and it's not just one or two boxes, there's a whole raft of postal boxes being thrown in there to get Biden over the line. And then there's a couple of little comical ones after that, really late on, where they dump in a couple of really strong Biden votes just to make sure that they get it over the line in case of any discrepancy. And of course, as we all know, the count in Wisconsin was very, very close indeed. And what's interesting is when you look at the polling station, the in-person voting, the walk-in voting, all over the county, those dots are all over the place. Some of them are strongly Biden, many of them are strongly Trump, and that's because polling stations do have a local flavor, and you do get areas where people will be more for one candidate or the other. So those are scattered all over the place, as you would expect. And of course, the interesting thing is that in those, you see a strong preponderance towards Trump. And so these postal votes at the last minute were desperately needed by Biden in Wisconsin to just get him over the line. And they look entirely fraudulent. And to my mind, if there isn't either a re-vote or a recount in Wisconsin where they remove that obviously fraudulent contribution, and I think you'll find before those ballot boxes were thrown in with the mysteriously higher rate of Biden voting, that Trump was doing very well, going to win the state. Yeah. So this is decisive. And of course, Wisconsin is not the only example of this. As we all know, there are examples of this in Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Nevada, and elsewhere. And it does look as though this is a crude and somewhat panicked effort to steal the election. But we haven't even...
To just cut in a second, because you mentioned about being at various ballot counts yourself, and you've seen some. So I've seen some very suspicious videos online where it looks like people have been tampering with boxes and and actual election papers, but you don't know what's real and what's not. So we have to wait for the investigation to find out, an outcome from what's been going on. But from yourself, from your own point of view, so you've been to these counts yourself, electoral counts, as you said, from the European Union to local elections and whatnot. Have you ever come across, because I've seen videos online now, of the staff, the county staff, taping up windows so they couldn't be observed? Have you ever seen anything like that, where the count is completely blocked
absolutely off? Not. Absolutely not. The whole point is that representatives of all of the parties and people who have a stake in the count, and I think the general public as well, if they're interested enough to actually apply for a ticket to be able to get in. But representatives of all of those interested parties have the right to wander around the count and watch what everybody is doing, and they do. And people from the parties and the candidate teams watch very, very carefully. You watch the counting and you see them doing it. You make sure if you see anything untoward happening, you speak up immediately and say, "Look, what's happening?" All the counts I've been to, there would be quite a furore if there was some kind of counting agent or official wielding a pen on ballot papers. That would be regarded as poor form, actually, in the UK. And I'm obviously talking about the UK. I've not attended a US election count, but certainly the potential for someone with a pen and a lot of ballot papers to cause mischief is well understood and is there. And that's why generally, it's it's not the done thing in the count to take a pen and start altering or writing things on ballot papers. That just doesn't happen.
Now, this system, Dominion, which is the electoral counting system that's used in some of these states in the US, which has, been brought to light that, 6,000 Trump votes went to Biden. That's now been corrected, and they've gone back to Trump, putting him in lead in that area, geographical area. Obviously there are other states and other areas that use the same counting system, Dominion. Apparently, Nancy Pelosi's chief of staff is an executive of that, well, a long-time chief of staff. I think she's got a new chief of staff now. But a long time
as I understand it, it was one of her chiefs of staff went to work for a lobbying firm which lobbies in DC on behalf of Dominion. I'm not myself aware yet of further connections, but I mean, it looks likely that there are the connections that you're talking about, and it's highly suspicious. And there have been complaints about this, and many people, I think, in the past, over the last 20 years, have complained about the vulnerability of the software that's being introduced into the US voting system. One of the issues is the centralized ability to go in and alter the audit trail, the ledger of what's happened, and literally change votes. And I think that it looks very much as though this needs to be looked at very, very carefully, because it's not impossible that these back doors have been introduced. I saw an interesting analysis this morning about traffic on the dark web between Dominion employees or people with Dominion email addresses. And there's been a lot of goings on through the dark web, and of course, not everybody has perfect technical knowledge, and they don't. Many of them realize the extent to which all internet traffic is logged and saved. And we had this PRISM system, and so certainly one would expect that the intelligence agencies in the US and the UK would be watching in as far as possible all the traffic. And the claim is that there's an air gap, or was that there was an air gap, so that the voting machines are not directly connected to the internet, and therefore there was no possibility of intrusion and exploitation of vulnerabilities in the machines. But that's clearly not the case. And we heard in, I think, Michigan, one of the counting officers saying that there was an upload to the Dominion system in the middle of the count, in the middle of the night, and that there was an upload and they installed something. Well, I mean, for that to be happening right in the middle of a poll that's being counted, should be impossible. That is, wide open to interference from whoever the highest bidder is, and I think that Biden is a big bidder. But clearly, a well-funded campaign, everything at stake. They've spent 4 years trying to undermine the presidency in every possible way, mostly through dishonesty. So I think, what would you expect to happen? So the fact that the system is built like that makes it incredibly vulnerable. I also read this morning an appraisal by a security expert who has done lots of work for the military and has various clearances and so on, saying that he himself wrote I think 45-page document about the vulnerabilities here in the Dominion system, or in these systems, Dominion included rather, and saying that the way they had been set up was not just insecure, but an invitation to abuse, because where power is concentrated to the extent that there is one or a handful of people who have the power to change the vote in a whole US state, it's going to cause a lot of problems. So I remember arguments about the dangers of this kind of automation of the voting system and counting back in the late 90s, and people were frightened then, and people were saying, hang on, this is going to concentrate power too much, and it's going to introduce, because small scale abuse is one thing. When you've got let's say you've got a postman who's determined to adjust 50 or 100 votes when he finds them and so on. Okay, that's one thing. But when you've got someone who at the flick of a switch can suddenly introduce 100,000 votes into a state, then you've got real potential for abuse.
It's a big game changer. And what else? What have you thought about the way the media have reacted to this? So we saw when Trump was first elected, we heard for 4 years there was Russian interference and Russian collusion, non-stop attacking Trump, and now we've seen this, suspicious win, shall we say, putting it politely, for Joe Biden and Comrade Harris. The media are behind them, and have announced them the winners, even though they know there's an ongoing investigation onto electoral fraud and whatnot. And I think the Russian President Vladimir Putin is the only one who hasn't congratulated them yet, and he said we'll wait until the evidence comes about or whatever, till the investigation is concluded before he'll actually congratulate them. But the media have really stuck it to Trump big time, and so have social media. In fact, I don't know if you've seen on Twitter, a lot of his tweets have been censored, so you actually have to click on them to view them. Some of them you can't even share or like. He's calling out this electoral fraud, and he's being censored left, right, and centre. What have you made of this?
Well, I think it's a disgrace, and I'm particularly horrified that Boris Johnson has sent a message of congratulations to Biden, even though the result, frankly, is not at all firm at this stage. And I would say this, that I really hope that the US Supreme Court has got the spine to really look properly at this and really think about whether the US, one of the bastions of democracy in the world, wants to head down this route of turning a blind eye to what I think is a grossly fraudulent election, because it sets the world a very, very bad example. And I really think that, I've posted in the last few days that we're looking at a new dark ages if this is allowed to happen, because it essentially means the end of democracy as we know it and love it. I think that great pressure will be brought on the UK not to have a proper Brexit, which is something that particularly concerns me. But generally, I think that we will head further and further into meaningless elections where nobody has any confidence that their vote matters at all, because the result of the election is not actually determined by the voter himself. And so I really hope that they will look very hard at this and decide, actually, there's several states here where the fraudulence looks so blatant and so widespread and on such a scale that we need to possibly even run the votes again. And in the wider sense, I think that we all need to think about how you return to fairer democratic elections. And one of the things that's been clear, if you look for Rahman in Tower Hamlets, is that we have huge scale abuse of elections in this country, and postal votes are a huge part of that. And we need to ask ourselves, why do people have the right to vote postally? What is wrong with turning up at a polling station? And in my view, I would like to see people having to dip their finger in an indelible inkwell when they vote so that they can't come back. And if people start turning up with showing the wet ends of their fingers chopped off, then I think the polling station will know what's up. But it needs to come down to some good old-fashioned basic democratic principles, because it's all getting out of control. We're seeing more and more, and now we're seeing this push for voter ID. And I don't believe in voter ID. I hope it doesn't become necessary, but I can see now the arguments for it. 15 years ago, I was very against ID cards for the UK. I felt that we were free UK citizens, and the only people who ought to be required to identify themselves were, people on parole or people who, visitors to the country who were not UK citizens. So I'm very worried about that as well. It's all a mess, and we need massive electoral reform in order to go back to the simple principle of one man, one vote, and the votes are counted locally and with great scrutiny and observation by everyone involved, so that everyone can at least have a reasonable expectation that the result reflects something like the reality on the ground.
I think you're spot on there. It's not just about the US elections. This is an attack on democracy itself, and we're slowly heading into socialist systems throughout the West. They're sneaking into, all our institutions, slowly taking over. We also saw a tweet not long after the news started announcing Joe Biden as the President of the United States from Sadiq Khan, of all people, congratulating him, and followed by another tweet urging Labour voters to follow suit and register for a postal vote, with a link telling them, they could, look at what the Democrats have done basically, and register for a postal vote. And as you mentioned there, just a moment ago about the electoral fraud over in Tower Hamlets. We've also seen it across the UK, particularly from Labour. So it seems to be a trait from the left. If you go onto Google and you type in electoral fraud in the UK, the majority of the cases that do pop up are Labour local councillors.
Yeah.
There was one I was reading not so long ago, which was between, I think it was two councillors, one which was a Labour candidate and both from the same background, I might add. I won't go any further than that, but have a look yourself. And the population of this town went up by 21%.
Yeah.
And they came by postal vote. So it's a huge issue, which really needs to be addressed. And I think it's really concerning that the Mayor of London is now urging people to register on postal votes, don't you?
Yeah. Well, and that's it. And, it's the old joke that 137% of Londoners support our mayor. That's where we're heading. And I really, it's really frightening. I think we're going to end up with a electoral system that is simply not fit for purpose at all. And at that point, you cease to be a democracy. And at that point, it's an old-fashioned gold rush. Everybody go and grab what they can. And I think that'll be a very frightening world. I'm very, very concerned about it. So it seems to me to be absolutely crucial. Something that's bothered me just half an hour ago is that I think, most of the press declared for Biden, whenever it was yesterday or something, and said, "Oh yeah, he's won it." And now today, my mother calls me, "Oh, have you seen this, darling? Marvelous! Pfizer have come up with a vaccine. It's finally solved." And it's like. I suddenly thought, my God, she gets all her news from the BBC and all of that, and the fake media. And I said to her, do you wonder why that didn't happen last week, just before the US election?
Yeah.
And she had to stop and think about that, because if you look at the timing of it, the timing gives the game away. Suddenly, coronavirus is going to disappear now, and the reason is Biden and peace and love, and we can all go out and celebrate in the streets and blow kisses and be hippies while the state grasps more and more power over us and entirely removes any possibility for alternative views, alternative politics, any opposition whatsoever. It really is Orwell's 1984, and that's what we have arrived at now. And this US vote, I think, illustrates that the media and the control of fraudulence in the voting system through software and the internet, and I suppose you could say the plutocrats, the treacherous plutocracy might be the expression for it, is the people who are so rich and so globalist that they look forward to the end of the nation state. They look forward to the end of nationality. All they care about is getting their low-wage workers in wherever they can to maximize profit, and they don't care what happens to the people at all. They pretend they do, but in fact, it's really just about their own power and their own profits. And we see that. Look at Twitter and look at old Jack Dorsey, and it's, as you rightly said a minute ago. I mean, it's just disgraceful that I'm actually horrified and amazed that we live in a world where the US president, sends a tweet, and the controller of Twitter puts up a warning saying, "This isn't true. Don't read this. Don't believe this." And it's the US president. Who's really in charge here? What the hell is going on?
Yeah, it's also that video I showed you, where you see on Twitter with the news anchor. He's basically Trump's talking, and he just cuts him off completely and says, "No, we're not even going to let him talk about that." Like, you can't make up your own mind. You just have to take the news anchor's word for it. There's rubbish. I just think it's funny that you mentioned your mother there, because I was talking to Mum when this pandemic first started, and I was saying to my mum, it's all a load of rubbish, and she was like, "Oh, I said, wait until the US election's done. As soon as the US election's finished, it will all calm down and it will all blow over, because they've got the need now for mass postal votes. They're telling people, oh, don't go to the polling booth, it's too dangerous, spreading coronavirus, send in your postal votes." And that was a big enough excuse for people to send in postal votes. That's my personal opinion. I think it was all set up by the globalists to remove Trump. I really do.
And they undercooked it, because as far as I can tell, Trump did very well in this election, and his vote share of most of the minorities went up, votes went up. He was taking states, and when he took Florida, the globalist, Democrat conspiracy went into full-on panic mode, and you could see it. You could smell it in the broadcasts, the nervousness, and I think that's why they resorted to plans B, C and D. And I think the problem with plans C and D for fixing that election is I think there's a good chance that they've been caught, and I really hope so. And I really hope that the US Supreme Court will understand how serious this is and deal with it, because they have been sloppy, very, very sloppy. If I, sitting here, can go on Twitter and see a graph that demonstrates clearly that Wisconsin was, a state that was fraudulently attained by Biden, just from the voting pattern as it happened on the night with the different averages in the different ballot boxes, then they've been sloppy. So we'll see. I hope they get done for it. I think people should go to prison. And I think there's quite a lot of people in the US that should go to prison for what's just happened in the last week. And I hope that the Supreme Court has the guts to allow these states, these very suspicious-looking swing states, to have another vote and a much better scrutinized vote. And I think that there's a need to return to more primitive ways of counting votes. It can be done, and we've done it for centuries. So there's no reason why you can't count votes without vote counting machines and software and a connection to the internet. And all of this fiddling around. It can be done, and it should be done.
Well, let's hope so. Let's hope Trump triumphs, because otherwise we're stuck with Joe Biden and Comrade Harris. As we know, Joe Biden is pretty much an anti-British, has an anti-British view. We've seen recent photographs of him with Jerry Adams and a known IRA terrorist, and various other videos popping up with remarks he's made about the Orange Man and etc. We could really do without someone like that in power in the US. It would have been nice to struck a trade deal with Trump while we had the chance, but since Boris Johnson was sitting on his hands, and he may well have had other plans.
Well, I cannot for the life of me understand why Johnson goes steaming in and says, "Congratulations to Joe Biden, the winner." I think that's a very, very unwise. But don't forget that Johnson's got history for this. In about 2012 or so, I can't remember. I think it was around then. He said he didn't want to go to New York because of the very real danger of bumping into Donald Trump. So he was already being rude about Trump. He must have known that there was a possibility, or perhaps he didn't realize there was a possibility that Trump would end up US president. I mean, the rest of us knew it. I mean, he's been talking, everybody's been asking questions about it for 40 years. So, it's not exactly a new idea that Trump would stand for the presidency. And as someone said to me, of course, Trump's going to win. He's a winner. That was back in 2016. Well, perhaps, so Johnson has form for for jumping in on the wrong side, undiplomatically to US presidents. And I think that move by him could turn out to be a mistake. And I've got a lot more respect for statesman-like leaders who don't jump in before the result is actually official and finalized.
Such as Vladimir Putin, eh? Who would have thought?
Well, in this case, you don't have to like him, but in this case, he's waiting till the US decides what the result of its election is, rather than steaming in. And when you think of 4 years, they've been banging on about how Putin tried to influence the election in 2016. There's never any evidence of it. They failed to demonstrate it. They banged on about it for years and years and years, and it was all crap. And that's a polite word for it. And so in this case, we see Putin not committing. Well, why should he? There it is. And meanwhile, it's Biden and Dominion and all these people who've put in place these voting machines that are genuinely vulnerable to attack. And don't underestimate the Chinese or the Russian information warfare capabilities. They are extremely, extremely competent at that. And of course, the US and the UK are also competent. So the US is very competent, but never underestimate your opponents. That's an error. And so I just think that leaving your voting system open in that way, which it's bound to, and ever since the Snowden revelations, it's been. I think that the whole WikiLeaks and Snowden data dump illustrates that the US establishment, intelligence industry, and military are not competent to look after their own data and their own data systems and the networks. They showed that they were that they ran a vulnerable system. Why? Because it was penetrated and exploited by Snowden. And I've got nothing against him. I think he was someone who was motivated by conscience. But what he did do really for the US is a huge favor. He showed the US, look, you're wide open. Look what I can do. If I can do it, probably others can too. And I think it showed that the US had failed in the proper compartmentalization of its data, military and intelligence and diplomatic data functions. And that's a mistake. One person had too much access. And it looks to me as though the centralization of control in this Dominion system and other voting systems is an equally dangerous vulnerability because of too much central control. And I think we're seeing the fruits of it now, which is an utterly fraudulent US election.
Well, let's hope they get to the bottom of things and work out what's going on, because clearly something isn't right. There's too much evidence pointing towards electoral fraud. Thanks again for your time, Richard. Really appreciate you coming on. A pleasure as always. Giving us a great perspective, a view of looking at things. I don't know. Personally, I think, like you said, that basically they fucked up. They put in too many votes at one time. They're going to get caught out. Let's hope the Supreme Court sees the light, so to speak. And you never know. We might see President Trump on January 20 with a Bible.
I mean, can you imagine the Trump derangement syndrome if Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, Georgia, if one or many of them have to vote again and deliver the result to Trump with a clean and fair election, can you imagine the meltdown that we're going to see? I mean, I think that is a serious danger in itself. But one must not give in to violent bullies, and that's what's gone wrong this year in the States. This is a country that seems to have given in to violent bullies in the same way that parts of Europe, I think, are giving in to another particular category of violent bullies. And we need to stop giving in to violent bullies. We need to stand up to them and say, all right, do your worst. Yeah.
Well, I better go, Richard, because I've got to jump online and register my ancestors. Vote.
Well, I've got to register my 76 children for a postal vote, because it's coming. Anyway, that's the future. That's the future. I mean, this is so dangerous to our society. This is so dangerous. The bad feeling, the division, the hatred that's growing as these charlatans and cheats and bigots and racists on the left continue to attack decent, sensible, common sense, old-fashioned values is just growing and growing. And they really are fomenting civil war. And I got in trouble for saying this in 2016 or 2017 when people were refusing to accept the result of the referendum. And I said, look, if you carry on like this, you are fomenting civil war, because you're not saying anything that we haven't heard over the decades. You're not going to change your minds now. And so if you want to disenfranchise half or more of the population of Britain and tell us that we don't have a right to think and say what we think, and we don't have a right to express ourselves at the ballot box and actually be represented in politics, then what does it come to after that? There is no other way to settle a division and an argument. It ends in a proper breakdown of civilized society, and that's what they are heading for. That is what they're fomenting, and they are fomenting it by deliberately disregarding the building blocks, the foundations, the pillars of the successful civilized Western society that has given us the privilege and all the benefits that we have. And they are just they're demolishing the temple. They are demolishing the temple.
As the saying goes, freedom of speech is the very cornerstone of democracy, and they keep censoring people. Like you said, if people can't express themselves and their views, sadly, they'll just turn to violence, wouldn't they? But,
I hope not.
Anyway.
I pray that doesn't happen. But the left has done so much to try to provoke that. And I think what's remarkable is how people on the right, but I'm talking about patriots, not even particularly right wing, but people who believe in their country and believe in sensible, old-fashioned values to do with families and freedom. I think those people on our side of this this political suicide attempt have shown unbelievable restraint and patience and good nature and robustness. And I don't know how much longer it's going to go on for, but people have who've been so abused over the last 4 years, for instance, for voting for Brexit, who've been so abused. We've been incredibly patient. How much longer will we be that patient? I don't know. But if stuff like this US election keeps going on, bad things are afoot. It's a bad omen.
Well, it certainly looks that way in the US. It's just one spark, I think, and the whole place will explode into civil war. So let's hope they sort this out ASAP. Thanks again, Richard, for your time. Really appreciate it. I look forward to speaking to you again.
Great. Thanks a lot, David. Good to speak to you.
Take care. Bye-bye.